You can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. This is Tim.
And this is Kumar.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Kumar in Melbourne. Kumar sent me these 5 books that are sitting between me and the microphone here, so I'm a little farther from the microphone than usual. This is a series called Summit of the Gods. It's just 5 volumes. They're kind of thick, big volumes, but just 5. So now you're the expert on this. So why don't you introduce it and how you're aware of it?
Okay, this is a series. It's a manga series. It was adapted and illustrated by Jiro Taniguchi, based on a novel, or I don't know if it was a series of novels or just one novel by a fellow named Yumemakura Baku, and I was the translator on it, and I worked on it from probably around 2007 to around 2009 or something like that, around that period.
Okay, yeah, and this manga originally came out between 2000 and 2003.
Yes, and I think the novel came out earlier.
Yeah, 98.
Right, because the series is actually set in 1993 and 1994, the current period of it. Okay, so we've never done, except for briefly mentioning Crying Freeman about 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think we talked about the first volume.
Yeah, we've never done a book that I've translated. Usually, I feel that I'm too close to them. But
well, didn't we talk about I'm so bad with names these days. What's his name? God of Manga.
Oh, Tezuka.
Didn't we do a Tezuka that you had translated? A short one.
Metropolis.
Yeah.
Maybe it was, right. That one might have been the same episode.
Maybe so. Yeah, I think you're probably right. Because I think that was the episode where we were talking about manga translation mainly, and so we looked at a couple of things that you had translated.
That's right. So this one, but it's been a while, and it's actually one of the series that I'm proudest of. And it's only 5 volumes. They're thick. They're 300 pages each. But it's self-contained. I think, we'll get to what it's all about, but it's kind of all about, mountaineering, and especially, attempts to climb Everest, actual attempts, and some fictional ones that are portrayed here, and it's as simple as I can make the description of it. I think it has absolutely one of the best endings of any series of anything, anywhere.
I'd have to agree with that. Finishing it today, I thought, that was the most satisfying ending possible for this comic.
It's really powerful. And I found a lot of manga, when they end, even if they weren't that great, often the finale is really spectacular, and this one was very powerful. Mm-hmm. I felt. So I did really love it on that level. So I just thought, this is and another reason I've decided we should do is I believe it's published by Fanfare / Ponent Mon, and they're a very small outfit. In fact, I think Stephen Robson of the Fanfare end is running the show by himself, basically. And he's more of a distributor, but occasionally he publishes stuff if he likes it. But I think it was kind of a little bit out of print, and now he's come up with a system where it's back in print, so you can get them all. And I think you might have to go through his website or something. I'm not sure exactly how the availability works, but as far as I know, all 5 volumes are available.
Mm-hmm. Okay. By the way, I noticed that later, after the manga was published, there was an animated version made in Europe in early 2015.
Okay.
And then there was a live-action version that came out in 2016.
That played actually at the Japanese Film Festival here in Melbourne just about a month ago, and I had a schedule conflict. I couldn't go to it. But yeah, that's brand new as well. I can't... But as we'll get, when we get through as we talk about the manga, I don't see how the live-action version could compare, really. I don't even know how the prose version could compare. I think this is especially Taniguchi is the choice of artist for this series and adaptation. I just don't know how you could top it. But anyway.
Yeah, well, now talk about Taniguchi, because he's done a lot of work. I'm not real familiar with him, but I was looking at his Wikipedia page.
Okay, well, basically at the moment, the only Taniguchi you can get is published by Fanfare. They're basically the outlet. So I've translated quite a few of his books for Fanfare, including one called A Distant Neighborhood, which just came out in a single volume, 400-page thing recently. And... A Zoo in Winter, which is another one I've done for them. I don't really know much about his background. I believe he doesn't work with assistants, which seems crazy, considering the art. I've heard that.
Really? I was looking at this and thinking this is probably mostly done by assistants at
I don't know if it's true or not. I don't quote me on that. But yeah, it just seemed like, why would you want to draw that? There's a city with every little building drawn.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of photo-based backgrounds of mountains or cities, depending on where the scene is.
Well, the mountains, I don't know, I've been watching a lot of Bob Ross lately, and he has some certain, brush techniques, with the painting knife, that he's able to paint a mountain in 3 seconds and make it look really great. So there might be some sort of way of doing that, but the cities they're obviously traced over photos from helicopter shots or whatever, and they're just insane. So yeah, I don't know I don't know what the process is there, but anyway, I don't know. He did earlier on his career, he did more kind of genre type stuff. More recently, he has more of a reputation for being more of a literary manga artist, kind of more on the artistic side of the spectrum, I guess. Rather than his stuff is very quiet and composed. It all tends to have the same that kind of quality or flavor to it, like certain film directors, they're very identifiable. So it's very much in his style. So I don't know what the book was like, but this is, it's almost like the book didn't exist. There's so much of Taniguchi's fingerprints all over it. Even the quality of the narrative, like the narrative caption, the third-person omniscient narrator, that kind of, and the prose quality of that is very much in Taniguchi's style as well. And all the kind of emotional thoughtfulness about it, lots of people just kind of living in their own thoughts and emotions. That's something you identify with Taniguchi a lot too.
It's very serious. There's not really any humor in it, or very little.
Yeah, almost.
Maybe some of the drinking scenes. There's a little bit of kind of joking around anyway. It's not really funny to the audience, but
no. Well, he has an editor named Miyagawa who there's a character, the main character Fukamachi, when we get through this, who finances his trip to Everest for various reasons, which we should talk about eventually. But anyway, he's got kind of a jokey kind of quality to him. But really, there's never... Did I chuckle once or twice? I'm trying to remember if I did rereading it.
I think the only times I laughed was when I felt like just kind of the emotion was a little over the top.
I don't know if that, but certainly I chuckled with disbelief at the hell these people were putting themselves through to climb mountains like Everest or other mountains for no reason that non-mountain climbers could possibly understand. And a lot of the book is about trying to grapple with why are we doing this? And there's no real answer to that, even after 1,500 pages of it. There's no conclusion as to why mountain climbers climb mountains, because it's not like anybody you kind of vaguely see a headline like first blind man to climb Everest, and you scroll past it, and it doesn't even really register anymore. Nobody is aware of achievements in mountain climbing except the climbers, I think. Mm-hmm. And I doubt anybody. A lot of the book is about who really was the first person to set foot on Everest. Was it Mallory and Irvine?
On the summit.
These Englishmen who climbed it in 1924, and they were near the summit, but it's unclear what happened after that, whether they made it or not, because they never came back alive. And then later it was Edmund Hillary in the 50s who made it to the summit. So there's this kind of like, well, what really happened? That mystery is explored, but the reality is, if you ask anyone on the street who Hillary or Irvine were, they don't know. It's forgotten knowledge almost. Very few people really know who the first person was to climb Everest. So it's this very kind of hermetic community that the passion of every climber. There's no such thing as a casual climber, really. Almost is so intense in these 5 books. But outside of that world, it's something that nobody even cares about. And as we'll get to, I mean, the climactic climb, or the penultimate climactic climb, the guy's climbing and he knows that no one will ever know about it. In fact, they can't, because he's climbing illegally. Mm-hmm. But anyway, the Hillary, Irvine climb is a good place to start talking about the plot, because that is where the plot starts, as we start with this flashback to 1924, and they're climbing, and then their view of them is obscured as they're about to reach the summit. But, and
then they're never heard from again.
Right, so and they're never heard from again, and one of them was carrying a very specific camera of the time, and then we come to the present, 1993, and the main character of the series is a photographer named Fukamachi, who has
Makoto Fukamachi.
Right, he has come to Nepal with a climbing expedition as their climbing photographer to shoot them climbing up Everest. Well, the climb fails because 2 of the climbers fell and died, and that is a consistent thing. Like every climb, somebody dies. Somebody dies, and it's foreshadowed too. And it's not even like it's not even a surprise. It's like because it's foreshadowed 50 pages before. Oh, this was the climb where this disaster happened, and you get to it, and sure enough, somebody fell and died or whatever. So anyway, and in fact, in volume 5, there's a line that says, "If you're a climber over 40, you know someone who has died." Like it's that commonplace, and it's one of the layers of detail in the book. It's so, everything about the climbing is so intense, and one of the intense things is the imminence of death. Like it's almost guaranteed to happen to somebody every time. So anyway, so Fukamachi's in Nepal, this thing's falling apart, and he's just kind of wandering the streets, and he's kind of listless and depressed because of this disaster that's happened. And he stumbles into a used goods shop, and he finds a camera, which is a match of the camera that went up the mountain with Hillary and Irvine in 1924. And it's like, if this is
Mallory.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
You said Hillary. Hillary's later, right?
I think, okay, sorry. I think I've said Hillary like the wrong time 50 times now. Anyway, so he finds the camera.
Mallory's camera, yeah.
Right.
Possibly Mallory's camera.
Right, possibly. So if it is, it's going to unlock a big mystery about whether they made it to the top or not. So he tries to act casual and say, I want to buy this camera, and that leads to a whole bunch of other things. And the big question is, where did the camera come from? Who found the camera? Well, it turns out it was this Japanese climber. Strangely, he's Japanese, but he's in Nepal. He's initially known as Bika Samp, which means poisonous snake. But then it turns out his name is Joji Habu, and it turns out he was this legendary Japanese mountain climber with kind of an abrasive personality, but he was the first to do a lot of Japanese climbs which were really treacherous, and he pulled off all these achievements. But he was really kind of egotistical, and you can get more into his personality a bit later on.
Can I mention something here?
Yeah, sure.
Something that I thought was maybe kind of lost in the translation. So his Nepalese name means venomous snake, and his real family name, Habu, is a type of snake that lives in Okinawa.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Okay, that's why it was lost in the translation.
I might have noticed that the first time I looked at it, and then lost it. But maybe that's how. Yeah. Okay. So that would have been why he got that name in Nepali. We've chosen the Nepalese equivalent of his name.
Yeah. I don't know about Joji, if that has any significance.
No, I don't think so. But I haven't looked at the original Japanese in 8 years, so I don't remember what was there. And that starts to Fukumachi's wondering, did I really just see Joji Habu in Nepal? And if so, what's he doing here? Like, he had vanished from Japan 10 years ago or something, and people were wondering, was he dead or what would happen to him? Nobody knows. And he thinks he spotted this guy and had a conversation with him. He's not 100% sure. But he goes back to Japan, and that starts him unraveling the whole history of Habu's life. And we get kind of a biography of him.
Yeah.
As well as all the stuff that Fukumachi is going through, and then these rivalries that Habu had, especially with a guy named Tsune Haseo, and that whole relationship between them. I have to
say, so from chapter 3, which is kind of in the first part still of the first volume, up to chapter 20, which is the first chapter of the third volume. It's mostly flashback. And
yes.
I found that really exasperating. Like, when is the story going to start?
Right.
I mean, it was useful information, but I didn't see why the author decided to tell so much in flashback. I mean, those first couple chapters with the camera, I thought, oh, this could be interesting. There's some intrigue about this camera. But by the time you get to chapter 21 and they finally pick it up, especially since this was in a monthly magazine, Business Jump. I mean, you've gone almost 2 years without any mention of the camera.
I hear you, but I totally know why they did it. Because imagine telling the story chronologically, where we just get all this stuff about Habu, and then finally we get to Fukumachi finding this camera.
Right.
It's kind of the wrong...
Well, the camera draws you in, but I think then there's just too much after that, and you kind of lose the thread.
And it's not even, I mean, there's nested flashbacks because there's the stuff about Mallory and Irvine as well kind of in there. But the other thing is, ultimately, it's the book, it's about Habu, but it's also very much about Fukumachi. Even though initially it seems up to, volume 3, it seems like Fukumachi is just a conduit to tell the story of Habu. Actually, it's as much about him, really, because he's going through all his stuff, and the whole last volume pretty much is about Fukumachi. So I think I understood the structure. The flashbacks, it's hard to talk. I find it hard to criticize because I think it has to be paced a certain way. Like, I think you can't skimp on the mountain climbing stuff. And I think you need the big spreads of the mountains. And I think when somebody is up there dying on a mountain, you need to dedicate 30 or 40 pages to that. Like, otherwise it loses its impact. Because I find the power of this series for me was the relentlessness of every aspect of mountain climbing. Not just the dying up there, which we mentioned earlier, but just the physical endurance needed, and even just the tools that you need and how specifically you have to use them. And one thing I really love was in volume 4, Habu's about to make this climb up Everest, and he describes all of the tools and things he's taking to Fukumachi. And he's got a pencil which he has sharpened down. Now, it's just a pencil. You'd think that's light enough, but in order to reduce the weight even further, he's sharpened it down to a stub. He's got a notebook, a travel notebook, a journal that he takes with him, But he looks at it and he tears the cover off. He's like, "That's more weight. It's just the cover."
Yeah,
you know?
and a lot of the paper inside too. I don't need.
Yeah,
that
and he
much
tears
paper.
out the paper inside. He's like, "I don't need the extra weight." And it's that severe. You have to be that hard on yourself to survive this climb. That kind of intensity, I feel you can't let up. So all of Habu's backstory, maybe they could have spread it out through volumes 4 and 5, maybe. But I don't know. I felt like structurally it was the way it needed to be, and it was the length of all the flashbacks. They had to be that long to show what the intensity of climbing, and also the intensity of his personality, because a lot of it is about him and all the bridges he burnt with people and stuff like that, because he was so obsessed with climbing. So it didn't bother me as much as it did you, I guess, is the bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, if you make it to volume 3 and you make it to chapter 21, then, it's good to have that knowledge. It's just, it can feel like a bit of a slog to get there.
Well, and I do feel like, I mean, when they come out of that in volume 3, okay, so there's this whole business where, there was this climber named, Kishi, a young guy who idolized Habu. Habu had gained a reputation as this legendary climber, and Kishi worshipped him, and Habu kind of took this kid under his wing, and he took him on a very dangerous climb, the two of them, and Kishi died on the climb. And through a chain of circumstances, Habu became involved with Kishi's sister, and she ends up like everyone else, doesn't know where he is. He's disappeared. But she comes into contact with Fukamachi. They think he's in Nepal, so they said, let's go there and find him. So they go to Nepal, and I think it's in volume 3 or very early in 4, because of this business about the camera and some of the local Nepalese, some hoodlums believe that it's valuable, they kidnap her.
Yeah, that was in 3. Mm-hmm.
Right. So this is right after all the flashback business, pretty much. Yeah. They kidnap her, and they have this, it's like something straight out of Tintin. So that was the segment to me that felt more out of place, because we had this very rich character study for 3 volumes, and then suddenly you've got literally a car chase along like a perilous cliff.
Yeah, it becomes an action story.
Yeah, it's total action sequence, and then the car goes over, and Habu goes down there, and there's kind of it is tied into the rest, because Habu, he has to climb down this sheer rock face and carry Kishi's sister back up the hill. He rescues people, and it's a kind of demonstration of how powerful he is, even though he's now over 40. But he's still such a powerful figure and a powerful climber. So there's that element there. But to me, that whole kidnapping plot and the car chase was like, this is a little bit out of place. And it almost could have been rewritten in a way that it didn't need to happen. But then, and then it kind of gets back onto the normal track where it delves very deep into the relationship between the Kishi's sister and Habu
I think I found that kind of refreshing as a big change of pace after all the flashback. Right.
Yeah, that's legitimate. I can see that, but I don't know. For me, I felt so deep into the understanding the intensity of Habu's personality that I was quite happy to. I didn't even really notice that it was 3 volumes long until you said it.
You mentioned that the climb towards the end, that he's climbing illegally, Habu's climbing illegally, and he can't tell anybody. But early on, when he's in the flashback stuff, when he has made some, fairly dangerous climb all by himself, he tells people. But I thought, like, he has no way to prove that he did that. Do they just believe him because they know how intense he is?
Yeah, that was an interesting point, and it seems to almost be like a gentleman's agreement in the climbing world that people say they did it and others believe it. I don't know. I don't know that either. And I thought it was the same, because I was thinking the whole thing with the Everest climb. Like, how are people going to know about it? But in that case, he doesn't care. It's not relevant if people know about it.
Mm.
And it's kind of not relevant. I don't know if he cares if people believe him or not. But yeah, that's kind of glossed over. But it must happen in the climbing world, because what we're talking about is what's called a solo climb, where you have no second person climbing with you or no team climbing with you. You're doing it all by yourself. So theoretically, not theoretically, I guess in the world of climbing, it must happen all the time where people, their achievement is, I climbed this XYZ solo,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I don't know how often, if ever, there is evidence for that, unless they had somebody at the bottom of the mountain taking the picture or whatever. But yeah, it's not mentioned how that was proven. But I think, I know that's not your point, but putting that aside, I think he almost doesn't care.
Mm.
Because he has some sort of compulsion to climb, and he doesn't know why. And like I said earlier, even at the end of Volume 5, nobody knows why anybody is climbing these mountains. He just feels like he has to do it. And he also feels like, well, I guess it is true that he does need people to believe him, because it's he owns it. Like, once he's done that, that's an achievement that nobody can take away from him. So I guess he does need people to, maybe he needs people to believe, or maybe it's enough for himself to know that he did it, I think. Maybe that's the case. But yeah, that's why when Hase shows up, this young hotshot climber who actually has a pleasant personality as opposed to Habu's, where he's kind of he's always hogging credit for doing things, and he says, I climbed this mountain alone, it doesn't matter who else was with me, really. Because he's more abrasive, this other guy's kind of nice and, handsome and smiling or whatever all the time. He ends up stealing some of Habu's accomplishments, or not stealing them, but doing him one better. And that causes a conflict between them, and that threatens Habu's identity, because his entire identity is climbing. He's got nothing else. Mm-hmm. We learn early on that, his family died, and he has this limp, because they were in a car crash together, and everybody else got wiped out. He, for some reason, he is nothing if he's not climbing. And another part of this book was I loved that I don't want to call it a passion, because it's almost like he doesn't care if it's, he doesn't get pleasure from it.
Yeah.
Or even satisfaction. He gets a sense of being from it, like he exists from it, just from doing it. And Fukamachi starts to develop something similar as well. Like, towards the end, he feels this compulsion to climb, that he has to go back. Although his is a bit more specific, but he himself can't identify what's compelling him to want to climb Everest again.
Mm-hmm. Coming up, some of the interesting difficulties Kumar faced in translating The Summit of the Gods, the fuzzy line between this work of fiction and the real history of mountain climbing, the immersive experience of reading this story, why was it published in Business Jump, and more. But first, if you value the content on Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Polls and want to help us move up to bigger and better things, how about donating a few bucks a month via Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. If everyone listening gave just $3 a month, it would make a big difference. We'd be able to reach several of our Patreon goals and bring you more content, including bringing back over 120 early episodes that have long been missing from our website. Check out all our goals and rewards and make your pledge at patreon.com/deconcomics. Or you can make a one-time donation via PayPal. Send it to donate@deconstructingcomics.com.
Hi, my name is Billy Hogan, host of the Superman Fan Podcast, which explores the world of Superman and the many creators who have added to his legacy over the decades. Episodes will feature creator biographies or highlight some of their top stories they have created as well as their top characters. Other episodes will feature topics appropriate to the holiday or the time of the year. For instance, Valentine's Day will feature stories about the women in Superman's life. April Fool's Day will feature some of the bizarre Superman Silver Age stories. or some of the imaginary stories that have been published. Halloween will feature some of the scary Superman stories, or some of his strange transformations, and of course, some of the Christmas Superman stories. The website can be found at supermanfanpodcast.mypodcast.com. The blog is supermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com, and you can send email to supermanfanpodcast@gmail.com. I also have a spoiler-free comic book review blog of the titles I read every week, which can be found at mypulllist.blogspot.com, and you can send email about this blog to mypulllist@gmail.com.
I found this kind of educational too. Like I had not known that you had to pay a lot of money to the Nepalese government to climb Everest.
Yeah, for sure. You'll learn lots about climbing, and I certainly learned a ton. Because for me, this is one of the most difficult translations I've ever done.
I was going to ask you what particular difficulties there were to this.
Okay, well, first of all, there's a lot of Nepalese in it. And I had to go out and buy a Nepalese to English dictionary and try to figure out what was going on. And there's a lot of, actually, for some, I'm guessing, historical reason, most Japanese climbing terminology is actually adapted from German. So when I was looking at it, and I was looking at the katakana, which is the writing system often used for foreign words which are borrowed into Japanese, they were often for German words. So I had to look up the German and then figure out what that was in English. Like, often with the equipment, that it's often described in German.
Yeah, which is probably not in your average Japanese English dictionary.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, it was very time consuming. And the most difficult stuff was, Everest is not really a place in the world where every corner of it has been explored. And even if it's been explored, it hasn't necessarily been named. So for us, we're just looking at a rocky mountain. But, for example, a team from Germany might climb it and give certain crags certain names, right? Or certain rock formations. We'll call that this name, and we'll call that that name.
Battleship Rock, I think.
Well, okay, I'm going to get right to that. So other teams, for example, let's say somebody from, I don't know, France, a French team comes up there, they climb a certain way, and they give names to certain things. But there's no consensus. And some things will get named by some teams and some won't. So there's one that's specifically mentioned in here is in Japanese called Battleship Rock. And I looked at this thing, and I Googled it like crazy, couldn't find anything. I went to the state library to pull a map of Everest, and looked all over for anything that was named Battleship Rock. Nothing. So what I had to do was, I had to email a guy named Chris Bonington, who had actually climbed, I found this guy on the web, he had actually climbed Everest on the southwest side. And I said, and I scanned the picture for him, the drawing, and I said, hey, do you have a name for this rock? And he said, no, we didn't have a name for it. So I had to directly translate it from Japanese to Battleship Rock, so Battleship Rock. It was very time consuming in terms of that kind of thing. And there was another thing where there was a quote from maybe Noel Odell, who witnessed Mallory and Irvine climbing. And it seems to have been maybe taken from a video that, like a silent film that he narrated, that he toured and narrated. And I couldn't find the original English quote. I had the Japanese quote. I couldn't find the original English anywhere. I had to email his granddaughter, asking her if she knew, and she was like, well, he gave different talks in different places. So all you get there is like what the translation of the Japanese. I don't know what he said originally in English. So
he might have had different wordings of the same thing.
Nobody will notice, but I know. And I spent a lot of time on stuff like that on this series.
Wow. Okay. Oh, I did some research about there's the talk about Mallory and the other guy, I forgot his name, who disappeared on Everest in the 1920s. and the camera. And I looked up what the historical fact of that was. And
has it been solved?
Well, so actually, Mallory's body was found in 1999.
Oh, okay.
After the novel was written.
Yeah.
And it was on an expedition by the BBC and the TV show in the States, Nova.
Yeah.
The camera was not found. But just Mallory's body. The other thing I noticed, the comic changes, or the story changes. I'm not sure, this probably originates in the novel. He was found on the north face of Everest, not the southwest face as in the story.
Okay. No, but it is on in the story, it is on the north, isn't it? Because doesn't Habu have to go over, like, isn't he coming down the Tibet side when he's descending?
Well, so...
I can't remember. You might be right.
I think at the end... I'm sure that it said in the story that it was found on the southwest side.
Okay.
And at the end when Fukamachi he climbs on the north side, and then he goes over and starts to come down the other side.
That's right. That's what I got wrong. Yes, you're right. Yeah.
So there is some basis in fact for this, but the camera has never actually been found apparently.
Okay. There's kind of an interesting thing there too, because the line between fiction and reality is very skillfully blurred, I think. Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of things in this series where they say, for example, this character was the first to climb this solo, which there must be a real-world person that did that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, it's, for example, if I say Fukamachi was the 36th president of the United States or whatever, it's like, well, actually, there was an actual person that did that. But then there's some things that are real. And, in fact, there's I don't know what to make of this, but when there's a Sherpa, who's a central character who's working closely with Habu named Aang Suring. And when I was Googling, okay, how am I going to spell this in English from the Japanese, there is a real Sherpa named Aang Suring out there. A famous one. And I was like, is this a fictional version of him, or did they just use the same name, or, because he's alive as far as I can, or at the time that I translated it anyway, I think he was still alive. So it was, it's kind of, some stuff is, and they go through the credits of all the people who have actually done the climb of Everest, and who's done it in winter and solo on this side, that side, and they're all a list of real people, real names who've done it. Mm-hmm. I felt like it made it all more real, and more immediate, I think. Mm.
Yeah, in the last part, I mean, inevitably there's a lot of climbing of Mount Everest in the last couple volumes. Yeah. And I was reading a lot of this like within the past day or two, and last night I read all of volume 4 last night and started 5, and there's all this, they're climbing in winter on the most dangerous side, and
without oxygen, and in a tent at night, and it's sleeping bag, and it's cold and it's windy, and rocks are falling, and if they're like 40 centimeters forward, they would be killed by these falling rocks.
And it started to kind of permeate my brain. I went to bed and I kind of felt like I was in a sleeping bag in the mountains.
Yes! No, totally. This is why, to me, this is one of the great things about this series, is it's so full on. Like, there's no escape from the intensity of it. I feel like you really get a sense of how harrowing it must be to try to do the insane thing that they're doing at the end. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so, I mean, I'm not ever planning to do this, but it was kind of a nice substitute for it. I mean, I've seen on TV this kind of thing also, but I think, this is done in such a dramatic way. It's a little bit over the top sometimes in the wording of some things and the drama, but But yeah, I mean, it really gets to be engrossing also.
Yes. Yeah, that's the best word for it, I felt like. I felt like I really couldn't. We were kind of talking about this a little bit when we talked about, what was it, Survival in the North?
Oh yeah, How to Survive in the North.
Yeah, about, and how much I like kind of survival stories for some reason. And harsh climates, stories about surviving in harsh climates for some reason really affect me. And maybe that was another thing that, attracted me to this, book. But, yeah, there's not a single second. And I mean, at the end he described when at the final, the climactic legs, I think he said he's doing like 100 meters an hour. And that's not even right at the end. And he's just going so slow, like he's barely moving. And you just can't imagine it. And he described it, I think he says it's minus 95 or something. Or
I don't
not
think it
minus,
was that bad, but minus 20 or 30 or something.
Yeah, yeah, it was just crazy.
And at that temperature, it doesn't matter if it's Fahrenheit or centigrade.
Yeah. But the other thing I loved about it too, which we've kind of been touching on, is that, well, maybe you liked it less, but in addition to the full-on nature of the climbing is the personalities, the individual personalities. I think Fukamachi is a very deep personality, and he's searching for something, and it's very ephemeral, and he doesn't know what he's really searching. He feels an emptiness inside himself. And, Habu is always trying to have this identity from climbing. But, and then there's the interrelationships, because then there's Habu and Kishi, and Kishi's sister, and his relationship with Tsuneo Hase. And then there's Fukamachi's relationship with Kishi's sister, which develops into something. Mm-hmm. And then there's Habu, it turns out to have, a wife, or a common law wife, effectively, and children. And there's that relationship, and then there's Ang Sereng's relationship even with Fukamachi, that kind of develops into something as well. And I loved all those interactions, and I kind of understand what you're talking about with the over-the-topness of some of that stuff. And it's, I think that's it's in a lot of, Taniguchi's works. But I think at the same time, if the mountain climbing was that full on and the characters were not, somehow it wouldn't work, because you wouldn't, a less intense personality, I don't think would be compelled to do the things that these characters do. Like to climb Everest. So I think it's almost a necessity that they be very emotionally, incandescent, so to speak.
I was wondering too, so there's a lot of emphasis in the story on, like, continuing to try and continuing to push yourself. And this was published in Business Jump for, like, young businessmen. and it felt so Japanese to me too. And I just wondered if it was kind of one purpose of publishing in that magazine was to encourage young Japanese businessmen to keep fighting and
wow,
work overnight every night.
Oh my god, I never made the connection because I didn't know it ran in Business Jump. I didn't look that up. It kind of tarnishes the whole thing for me if that was the purpose of it, was to...
I mean, I don't know what other kinds of series they ran in that magazine, if they tended to be in this vein or not, but...
What's the comic about the businessman that's been going for like 40 years? Salaryman, and he's gone up. He's now Shacho. I can't remember what the...
Yeah, I'm blanking on. That's the one that I saw on the side of the bus that one time, remember?
Yeah. Yeah, which is very much like an instructional, like, be all you can be and serve your company. I don't think that's the case here, because Habu is an anti-company man. He's kind of the central figure, and Fukamachi kind of takes after him eventually, is pulled into his wake. Because because he's like, screw society, I need to do this, and he quits jobs nonstop because they won't give him time off, and so it's almost, it's kind of the anti-business jump comic.
Yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
But it is certainly, and also, before you mentioned Business Jump, I did feel it was inspiring. Especially at the end, there's this, there's a speech about believe you can do it, and I was moved by that.
Mm-hmm.
I was moved by that passion for sure, or maybe we should call it obsession. But it affected me. Now, if you say he wrote that because he's trying to encourage salarymen, maybe I feel lesser about it. But
by the way, I just looked that up. Shima Kosaku.
Right, that's right. Yes,
I've looked up the picture of the bus on our site.
Yeah.
If people want to search for it was July 24th, 2009. I put that photo on the site, or the several photos actually of this bus that has the comics on the side.
Yeah. Yeah. So there is that, but I want to say one thing we have to mention about the series, which doesn't really fit into any of the conversations we've had so far, is I need to apologize for all the typos that are in it, which must have driven you nuts. I don't know what to say about it, except, Stephen, the publisher, is kind of a one-man operation. Volume 1 is worse than the others for the amount of mistakes in it, and spelling mistakes and stuff. I think often I bang out my scripts, I polish them as well as I can, and then I send them off, and I count on the editors to do the rest. And some stuff got missed, and it looked like some of it was the way they fed it through the lettering font. I don't know. So, but strangely, I was not super annoyed by them. I was very pulled along by the story. So I'm encouraging people to please, despite the typos and errors, there's no other way you can access the story in English.
I didn't notice very many, a few.
Wow. Okay. I thought I thought for sure you were gonna throw the thing across the room. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe I don't know if he can correct that in future editions, or if it's been laid out and it's not fixable. But I might ask him about that because it did bother me a little bit when they turned up, but it's almost irrelevant. Well, I want to say it's not that long. It's 1,500 pages.
But it reads fast. There's not.
It
so much
reads
text
very
on the
fast.
pages.
I mean, I paced myself at one volume every 2 days. And as I said at the beginning, they're currently all in print, I believe. And of all the books all the comics, this is all the translations I've done. This is the one that I loved the most, that the fewest people have read or heard about. It's because it's from a very indie publisher, and it's even an indie creator, at least in North America. It's kind of off the radar, but I think it's really, to use the word intense for the 50th time, it's so intense in terms of the climbing and the characters, and I just think the ending, that it's worth it just to get to that beautiful ending. The last 50 pages, even the last 100, is just so phenomenal.
It just ties everything up.
It's just so perfect and beautiful, and it's worth it just to get there. But I think the journey getting there too is really amazing too, and I feel like the characters are really real for me, and they were real living, breathing people, and they went very deep into their psyches to find a thing which, even at the end, it was still impossible to find, really. Yeah, for me, it's probably one of the things I'm most proud of having done, and I wish lots more people would read it, and that's why I thought it was a good chance to get it on the show.
The Summit of the Gods by Baku Yumemakura and Jiro Taniguchi is published by Fanfare, Ponent Mon. Write us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or look us up on Patreon, Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, and YouTube. All our social media links can be found on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Also, please give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. Our theme is from bensound.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and please try to keep it to about 30 pages. Critiquing Comics is released on the second and fourth Thursdays of the month, right here in this podcast feed. Last Thursday on To the Bat Polls, Paul and I examined Jay Thompson's script Hickory Dickory Dock, which was greatly edited by Charles Hoffman to become the Impractical Joker arc in the second season of Batman. What can we learn about 66 Batman from this script's missteps? We compare the two and discuss reasons for the changes, with commentaries contributed by listeners. Look up To the Bat Polls wherever you find your podcasts, or at tothebatpolls.libsyn.com. Another episode coming up this Thursday, when we discuss the Mad Hatter in The Contaminated Cowl. Next week on this show, I'll be talking with Ren McDonald, creator of the new graphic novel Sparks. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.